Now, I'm going to use my time allotted today to dispel rumors and falsehoods about humans. If you want to do well in my class, you're going to have to shed any prejudices or preconceived notions about the species and open your minds to the knowledge I bring you. He paused, taking a swig from his water bottle before continuing. Now, the first fact I will lay upon you is this. Humans are a peaceful race. Bullshit! An avian in the first row squawked. They're violent creatures. All they know is war and violence. Several students roared in agreement. It is true that unlike most sapients, humans are indeed instinctively violent, a testament to their predatory roots. But, and here's the important distinction, they are intellectually peaceful, which is more than some species can say who have chosen to become intellectually violent over their peaceful instincts. All of you are here today because at some point in your species, history, intelligence, and intellect took control of your minds, overriding your instincts, allowing you to become something more than the sum of your parts. Humans are no different. But they're predators, and predator species always look down on prey species waiting for a chance to hunt us down. It's a universal constant, buzzed a buzzard in the dead center of the lecture hall, his compound eyes filled with confusion and a splash of anger. Another rumor that seems to be floating around is that human soldiers eat their enemies. Although most humans do eat meat, I can promise you humans do not eat sapients. Lies! Shouted the Frontarian, finally speaking up. Humans are savage, bloodthirsty warmongers who despise all other species. There was a roar of agreement by several belligerent students. Oh, really? Questioned Krennic. And I suppose a human told you that themselves. The room fell silent, the Frontarian at a loss for words. I thought not. Have you ever even met a human? The Frontarian was silent, not knowing how to respond. Because I have. Many humans, actually. I lived and worked on Earth and Alpha Centauri for many years, studying human culture and history, and I've never gotten even the slightest impression of that ever being true. Actually, other than the Brovarians here, have any of you actually ever met a human? The room stood still as the professor scanned the room. He was about to speak up again when he noticed a single hand raised in one of the back corners of the lecture hall. He pointed to the student. Go ahead, tell your story. Suddenly, the lecture hall erupted in chaos as students near him, in a frenzy of panic, started trampling and stampeding over each other, trying to get away from the lone human. Students further away could be heard shouting things like, "Go back to Earth," and "Your kind isn't welcome here." The Brovarians and the lone human were dumbstruck, speechless at the events unfolding before them. All right, that's enough, said the professor, the class practically ignoring him. I said that's enough, he shouted, his voice echoing around the room several times before everything fell silent, students' ears ringing. The whole room froze, some staring at the human, others at the professor, not sure who to be more terrified of. Exceptionally loud shouting, another genuine trait evolved to scare off predators. This one he rarely used on students. Actually, this would have to be the first time he reached peak volume since childhood. He took a deep breath. Here we have an adult human male, the supposed most dangerous creature in the galaxy. And yet, the most dangerous thing in this room is your own fear and prejudice. I mean, by the gods, you people near him damn near killed each other in what can only be described as a pathetic display of primal instincts taking over. Some of the students started cautiously making their way back to their seats, ashamed of what had just happened, but still keeping one eye fixed on the human. What just happened here is a perfect representation of what happens in our corner of the galaxy far too often. Sapients' unfounded primal fear has led them to do some very stupid things, often leading to serious consequences for everyone involved. Whether it be a gang of sapients attacking a human on the streets, or a government invading their worlds. It always plays out the same. The humans beat back their aggressors, tapping into that primal predatory energy, inflicting much more damage than they take. The news media, being controlled by specist assholes, spin these incidents, making the aggressors the victims of those savage humans. The stories spread like wildfire until someone's fear causes them to do something stupid, starting the cycle all over again. It's pathetic, he practically shouted, starting to get green in the face. He took a deep breath. He had their attention, and it looked as though he may be finally getting through to them. He calmed himself before continuing. As I said, you will need to shed your prejudices and preconceptions, not just for the sake of your grade, but for your own safety and the safety of those around you. You may be university students today, but someday many of you may be in positions of power, positions where your actions have repercussions, expanding entire empires. Learn now, so when that day comes, your stupidity doesn't cost millions of lives. He paused a moment, taking it all in. Each and every student locked eyes on him. He could see the wheels turning in their heads, processing the knowledge he just bestowed on them. He looked up at the human, who was smiling and nodding in agreement. He looked down on the Frontarian, who looked ashamed, yet contemplative, as if it was starting to question the very foundations of its entire belief system. "Oh," he thought to himself. He really outdid himself this time. He'd let his lecture sink in for a few days. Well, that's all I have for you today. For next time, make sure you read chapters 1, 2, and 3. We'll be covering human mating rituals. He heard the human lightly snort, holding back a chuckle. Dating, marriage, and reproduction. This was going to be a good semester. He could feel it. Well, that's all I have for you today. For next time, make sure you read chapters 1, 2, and 3. We'll be covering human mating rituals. Ben snorted, holding back a chuckle. The thought of an alien teaching other aliens about human mating rituals was almost too much for him. After all, most humans had a hard time completely understanding the complexities of dating, let alone an alien. He noticed several nearby students had looked at him inquisitively. He quickly composed himself. Dating, marriage, and reproduction. With that, the students started packing up, and so did he. As he walked into the aisle, he looked to the front of the room at Professor Kreddick, who was looking right back at him. He gave him a quick nod before making his way towards a group of Brovarians. "I'm Ben," he said, holding out his hand. The Brovarian shook it, well aware of human introduction customs. He followed with a head nod, the traditional Brovarian custom when meeting someone new. Ben quickly nodded his head as well before turning and introducing himself to the rest of the group. Gitita, Frary, and Ivan were their names. "Ivan?" Ben questioned. "That's a human name." "Indeed it is," Ivan replied. "I was named after Admiral Ivan Drankov." "Ah," Ben said, noticing the name got the attention of the Frontarian as it passed on its way out. Ben made eye contact with it. A strong tension felt between them before the Frontarian made its way out of the room. "Well, it's nice to meet you all. What year are you?" "We're all first years," Trek said. "Me too. What dorm are you staying in?" Ben questioned. "And I'm in Zinclarity," Trek said. "Me too," Ben said, excited at the prospect of actually making a friend. Most of the students on his floor seemed to avoid him at all costs, making it exceedingly difficult to connect with anyone. "Are any of you down for lunch? I'm pretty hungry." He noticed a few students near him flinched when he said that, clearly listening in as they passed on the way out. "I could eat," Frary said as the others nodded in agreement. With that, they made their way out of the lecture hall, heading towards the nearest on-campus cafeteria. They entered the cafeteria, gathered their food from the buffet before picking an empty table and sitting down to eat. "So, Ben, what's your major?" Trek asked. They continued to talk and eat for about an hour, learning about each other's backgrounds before exchanging contact info. Afterwards, Ben headed to his next class. The class was much smaller than the lecture hall he had Humanity 101 in. The moment he entered, many students jumped back in terror, some freezing while others leaped to the far corner of the room. The professor at the front of the room turned and faced him. "You must be the human student." The avian professor said, "Yes, I was told you would be attending this semester." She had a disapproving glare in her eyes. "Please take a seat." Ben sat down at a seat near the door. He noticed many students took seats across the room from him, a trend that continued as more and more students filtered in. Soon the room was almost full, every seat taken except a ring of empty desks all around Ben. One final student entered. A female buzzard. She took a look around before almost freezing up at the sight of Ben. "Please take a seat," the professor said. The buzzard looked around once more. "I can't find a seat." "Nonsense, there's 8 empty ones right over there," she said, pointing in Ben's direction. "I am not sitting next to that," she said, pointing directly at Ben. The buzzard stomped over to the nearest seat, grabbed it, and dragged it across the room before finally sitting down. The professor proceeded to go over the syllabus, talking about her expectations for the class, major projects, and exams throughout the semester. The whole time, Ben noticed students kept nervously looking at him, quickly looking away whenever he'd turn towards them. This was going to be a long semester. After she finished, she dismissed the class and Ben walked back to his dorm room. He noticed his roommate's bag was gone. He had lived in that room for nearly a week and had yet to actually see his roommate. He had wondered if his roommate had been avoiding him, and based on what he saw today, that was most likely the case. He grabbed his textbook, The Terrans, A Guide to Humanity. Under the title laid a single author, Dr. Yitz Kredek. His professor had written the required textbook. What a surprise, he chuckled to himself. He opened to the first chapter, Human Reproduction. He skimmed the chapter. It was filled with diagrams and a biological explanation of how humans mated, nothing he didn't already know. He flipped to the second chapter, Dating. He began reading it. It was interesting. Although nothing in there was false, it was from an outsider perspective, displayed in a way he had never thought of before. Humans are a Class 2 mating species. Although there are exceptions, generally the males are the pursuers, while the females are the choosers. This is in sharp contrast to this author's species, the Genui. He never thought about it like that before. He looked back on his own experience in dating and noted how that statement seemed to hold up. He read the rest of the chapter, noting how weirdly accurate these bizarre descriptions were. After finishing that, he started reading the third chapter, Marriage and Family Structure. This one was much drier than the dating chapter. He skimmed about half of it before he closed the book. He was never much for doing the readings. Even back in high school, he had trouble motivating himself to do so. This time, however, he knew the course content going in, so he figured he didn't really need to do them. He checked his schedule to see what classes he had tomorrow. Fundamentals of biology in the morning, fundamentals of chemistry in the afternoon. He remembered back to when he registered for classes. Why did I have to pack my schedule with hard ones? He looked to his last class of tomorrow, Biological Intelligence, taught by Dr. Kredek. He quickly pulled up the syllabus. He wasn't going to be caught off guard this time. After reading through that, he decided to check his messages. Most of them were beginning of the semester stuff, a welcome to Avion State message, followed by several from his professors with precursory information about their classes. He noticed he had an unread message from his mother. He expected it to be a message asking how his first day went, as well as other pleasantries you'd expect from a mother going through empty nest. Instead, he was informed his cousin had been drafted into the war. That would make 2 close family members drafted in the past year. This damned war against the Brucali Empire had been raging for almost 10 years now. For over half his life, all he ever heard about was the war. They talked about it in school. They talked about it on the news. Both his parents worked in industries not normally associated with the military, but had been working on military projects for years. Ever since it began, the Terran Council had declared a state of total war. You couldn't step 1 foot on Terran soil without hearing about how the Brucali had retaken a system, or how many casualties the Alliance had sustained the past week, or overhear veterans talking about the brutality of the Brucali. Hell, he decided to go to college outside of the Alliance to escape the war. But even now it followed him. The rest of the week went similar to his first day. Students would either clearly avoid him or display blatant acts of speciesism. Most professors turned a blind eye. One even seemed to enjoy it. Except Kredek. Kredek would almost immediately shut down and scold students at the first sign of speciesism. Besides him clearly defending Ben's presence there, he also had the most interesting lectures. Not the just-in-course content, but he also had a flair for the dramatic and wouldn't be afraid to incorporate that into his lectures. A sharp contrast to his other professors whose lectures were dry. Ben liked him. Throughout the week, he also spent a lot of time with his new Brovarian friends, often hanging out around campus, chilling in someone's room, or even playing hall sports, to which they were shunned several times by the RAs. He noticed that as the week went on, he overheard himself being talked about several times by groups of aliens, unaware he was within earshot, something his friends had also brought up to him. Apparently, he was becoming quite well known around campus, despite not actually having done much besides being there. After 6 days of classes, the weekend had finally arrived. Now, there was a reason Ben chose this university specifically over any other alien colleges. In addition to being a leader in the academic sense, Avian State was also known as quite the party school. Being how the Avians had a 3-day weekend, he was excited. Trek had been invited to multiple parties and planned on bringing the entire friend group. They talked about which ones to go to specifically before finally deciding on one only a few blocks from campus. The group met up in Ben's room and proceeded to take a few shots before heading out. They cracked jokes to each other as they strode down the street towards their destination. It didn't take long for them to hear the music emanating from the alien house. Sapience filtered in and out as the group approached the door. 5 Zanes for entry, the tall avian guarding the door said. The group began forking over the alien currency when the bouncer stopped Ben. Not you. No humans allowed. Come on, man, he's cool, Trek said, motioning towards Ben. No predators allowed. House rules. What if we, Trek said, dipping deeper into his pouch, producing a 20 Zane bill. Paid you extra for the trouble? He dangled the currency in front of the bouncer before the avian took the bill and pocketed it. Fine, but I'll be watching you human. No funny business. Hey, thanks, man. I owe you one. Don't mention it, man, Trek replied. Either we all party or none of us do. The group was hit with loud pounding music and a crowded floor of intoxicated sapients dancing. The group looked around before noticing a line for free drinks, to which they quickly made their way over to it. The group waited as the line slowly inched forward. Ben tried saying something to Tretch, but was bumped into by a drunk Genue. Sorry, didn't mean to. Hey, you're the human. Don't eat me, man, he said, laughing at his own joke. Just kidding. See you around. And with that, he disappeared into the crowd. Ben cracked a smile as he turned around to find his friends bawling with laughter. He shook his head with a wide grin on his face. It didn't take long before they were up next. The bartender handed out some sort of concoction he called Jamie Slurp. Ben looked into his glass, sniffing it before taking a sip. It was very fruity, delicious. He couldn't even taste the alcohol. He drank about half his cup by the time the group made it to the dance floor. They began dancing to the music, joining the massive crowd. Within a few minutes, the alcohol began hitting Ben. Whatever this is, it's strong, he thought to himself as he took another sip. Ben lost track of time as the group partied. Eventually, his friends left to get refills. He looked down into his cup, still having about a fourth of his drink left. You must be the human I've heard so much about, she said, smiling wide. I'm Clintara, she said. So a human at Avian State, I've got to hear the story behind that. She giggled. Even in his drunk state, Ben knew that wasn't really that funny. Was she flirting with him? Well, I suppose that's reason enough, she said, taking a sip from her drink. Same as you, she said, Ben instantly forgetting the reason he gave her. It definitely wasn't the war, or was it? It's the pinnacle of education, she said in a light, mocking tone. To education, he said, raising his glass. Actually, he said, I wouldn't really know. I grew up on Alpha Centauri. Although I hear it's is nice. Did he really just say it's is? He looked into his cup before looking back at her. Enough to be too confident. He said proudly, before realizing how dumb that sounded after he replayed it in his head. She chuckled again. The two continued to talk and flirt for a while, making their way around the party. They had been talking for what seemed like an hour when Clintara looked at him seductively. You know, my dorm has a really great view of campus. Really? He said, cracking a smile. I like great views. The two entered campus, making their way towards Clintara's dorm. She hung on to Ben as they walked, one arm around his body, the other hand caressing his chest. Her red skin in sharp contrast to his. They continued to walk and flirt as they made their way to their destination. As they turned a corner, they were suddenly interrupted. Well, if it isn't Clintara and the human, a deep male voice said as a group of 5 aliens stepped out from the shadows. The 3 Vritorians and 2 Frentarians quickly surrounded the two. The Frentarians' long, skinny, dangly gray arms in defensive posture, and the 3 Vritorians flexing their muscular arms. First, they come strutting around here like they own the place. Now they steal our women. A Vritorian scowled. So you leave me for this tisk predator. What would your father say? He replied. Nothing that would be your business, she said angrily, crossing her arms. The two began arguing. Ben looked around. He knew this wasn't good. The 2 gray Frentarians were 4 feet tall, long dangly arms, and 2 stumpy hind legs. Normally he could easily take them, but he was drunk, not to mention the 3 Vritorians who were passably human in height and build, if it weren't for the deep red skin and wide-set eyes of a prey species. He was in trouble. Why can't you just leave me alone? She yelled angrily. May if you stopped gallivanting around campus, hanging around freaks. He looked directly at Ben, his eyes narrowing. Tell you what, you just walk away and we will leave you alone. Let us make sure this human gets back to his room. Ben didn't like this. Why did he have to leave the safety of the group? Fuck off, Jareb. I'm not going anywhere, she said, stepping towards Ben, putting an arm around him. Leave us alone. He quickly typed out a drunken response. On campus near Gren Hall, not safe, come quick. He barely had time to send before a Vritorian snatched his mobile away from him. Hey, give that back, he drunkenly slurred. It speaks, Jareb said smugly as his friend handed him Ben's mobile. Now let's see if it can fight. With that, a Vritorian dragged Clintara away from Ben, her screaming and struggling in resistance. Ben tried to push the Vritorian away, but was quickly shoved back by 2 others. It took all he had to not drunkenly fall over. Jareb quickly approached, dropping Ben's mobile behind him. Ben quickly raised his fists. This was not good. He took a swing at Ben. Ben ducked, almost falling over before Jareb's other fist made contact with his face, sending Ben to the ground. Fa! 1 punch and he's already down. Ben slowly made his way to his feet. Catch me when I'm sober, asshole. See how well you do then. Before Jareb had time to respond, Ben tackled him to the ground, quickly grabbing the hair on top his head and repeatedly slamming it into the concrete. Ben had never been much of a fighter, but he felt something primal rev up inside him, an ancient instinct taking over. He had only gotten a few slams in when he was violently ripped off Jareb, receiving a punch to the gut and face before being flung aside. He toppled to the ground. The alcohol was not helping him fight, although it did seem to numb the pain. He stammered his way back up in time to see a Frentarian take a swing at him. He quickly blocked the hit before grabbing the Frentarian by the wrist and swung him into the other Frentarian, knocking it onto the ground. He did a full 360 spin, swinging the Frentarian along with him before he let go, sending it into a Vritorian, knocking it back. Ben took another hit to the face, sending him back into the ground. He looked up to see another Vritorian standing over him. The Vritorian repeatedly kicked him, not letting him get back up. Suddenly, the Vritorian was tackled away. Was that Trek? The rest of the group quickly surrounded Ben, helping him up before they rushed to help Trek, who had wrapped the Vritorian in his glider wing. The Vritorian struggled, punching Trek in his thick black hide, completely missing the soft blue underbelly. Trek got up, kicking the Vritorian before falling back. The 2 groups came face to face. This isn't your fight, Brovarian. Why are you helping this human? One of the Vritorians said. Humans helped us when we needed them most, Trek said, opening his muscles, showing teeth to the Frentarians. It's high time we returned the favor. With that, Clintara was able to escape the hostile group and ran over to Ben. One of the Frentarians scowled. Human, Brovarian, all you Terrans are the same. You Bavarians may have descended from prey, but deep down you're all predators. No need to apologize, Ben said, groaning as he switched positions, his sides aching. I'm no stranger to crazy exes. Yeah, but it's more than that. Vertorians tend to be a little xenophobic, especially when it comes to humans. Well, it isn't just the Vertorians. Practically everyone, save for my Bavarian friends and a professor, seems to be specious towards me. He shifted again, letting out another groan. Ben, she said, looking into his eyes, her deep brown irises shimmering. Humanity is special. There are no other species like it. Humanity is exactly what this galaxy needs. Ever since the beginning of recorded history, there has never been a peaceful, non-supremacist predator-evolved species, which is a big reason why everyone seems to be afraid of humans. But it's also part of what makes humanity so special. It doesn't stop there. Not only is your species not supremacist, not only is your species not hell-bent on conquest, but your legal system and philosophy spouts equality and equal rights for all sapiens. The Alliance has taken in prey species in need before. The Bavarians, the Enorians, both species needed humanity, and humanity was there for them. This isn't just rare for a predator species, this is rare for any species. Humanity is special, and if more species were like you, the galaxy would be a much better place. Ben thought for a moment, well, that doesn't seem to be a very popular opinion around here. Here and back home, Clintara said. You have no idea how many arguments I've gotten into with my family about humanity. They just don't seem to understand your importance. Not to mention that the Terran Alliance is the only thing standing between the Brucali Empire and the rest of this sector. But instead of joining the fight, or at the very least leaving humanity alone, the corporate chooses to antagonize humanity and take advantage of their weakened position, as if they weren't the only thing standing between them and annihilation at the hands of the Brucali. You know, I've had the same thought before, said Ben. He looked down, pausing before looking back into her eyes. Thanks for not leaving me back there. I have no idea what would have happened if I didn't have time to send for help. He smiled before getting up and making his way across the room, his roommate still nowhere to be seen. He grabbed a few caffeine pills and swallowed then with a cup of water. The water poured down his throat, cooling his body. He sighed in pleasure as the liquid quenched his great thirst. He then took an ibuprofen for the pain before looking back at Clintara, who was sitting up looking at him. My species doesn't get hangovers, she said, cracking a smile. She kissed his cheek before getting up and fetching some water for herself. He watched as she walked away, thinking back to what they did last night. It was different from being with a human girl. Not bad, just different. No, he said inquisitively. They quickly got dressed before he opened his door where several armed and uniformed avians stood, their green wings hovering above their weapons. Ben stumbled as he was shoved into a holding cell, flinching as the door slammed behind him. He looked up, seeing Tresh and Ivan. Hey, where's Frary and Gitetta? Yeah, it would seem so, he said, looking around. Noticing the other aliens in there had put some distance between him and them. Where's Centaura? Ivan questioned. Beats me, Ben said. They separated us as soon as we arrived here, probably in the same cell as Frary and Gitetta. So, you were together when they brought you in? Trek said with a grin, nudging Ben. My man, Trek said, holding up his hand for a high five. Ben was about to indulge him when the cell door swung open. Ben looked at his friends before getting up and following the avion out, the door slamming behind him. Good, then let's get started, he said as he shifted positions and sifted through legal documents. You are a citizen of the United Terran Alliance, yes? Then by the Treaty of Open Hand and Wing, you are awarded full legal rights under avian law. As such, you may make a statement about your version of the events that transpired last night, Murno 45-7890, or by your calendar August 28th, 138. In the meantime, the avion said, we'd like to get your statement. Keep in mind anything you say here can be used for or against you at your trial. You may begin when ready. He returned with the mobile and a datapad. He gave the mobile to Ben before proceeding to link the datapad to the screen. Ben scrolled through finding the message and presented it to the room. "Now it's time to find out what the security footage says," an avian said, holding up the data pad. With that, footage of the previous night showed with full audio. It started with Ben and Clentara heading down the walkway, slurring flirts at each other before showing them being surrounded, threatened, and the fight. It ended after Ben and the group walked off. "Well, it would seem Ben, Clentara, and his Bavarian friends were telling the truth," Krennic said, his wide mouth cracking a smile. "Jareb Glopership, it is a Class 4 felony to lie to law enforcement officials and falsely accuse one of a crime," the avian said in a deep voice. The avian turned to Ben. "As the victim of their crime, you reserve the right to press charges or show mercy of law. Their fate rests on you." Ben looked at Jareb and cracked a smile. After the hearing ended, Krennic pulled Ben aside. "Listen, Ben, you have to be more careful." Ben raised his finger in protest, but was cut off by Krennic. "I know you didn't do anything wrong, and your actions in that fight were justified. But," he said, taking a breath, "but I'm going to be perfectly candid with you. The university has received numerous complaints about you being there, some from very influential alumni. Now, they can't just expel you for just any reason. The law prohibits it. But the administration is looking for anything and everything they can use to justify kicking you out. To be honest, they were hoping this was it. You have a target on your back, more so now than ever. Just be careful." Ben stood in silence for a moment, contemplating what he was told. "Thanks for the heads up, Professor. I owe you one." With that, they parted ways, Ben rejoining the group and Clentara. They made their way back to campus, exchanging stories of their trip to jail and their interrogations. Once they reached campus, Ben parted ways with the group and headed back to his room, exhausted from the day he had. He entered his room and made a beeline for his bed, plopping down into his soft mattress. Ben looked up to see a terrified-looking buzzard in the bed across the room. Its compound eyes locked on him, its sucker and thin back protruding wings frozen. "You must be Zert," Ben said. "I'm Ben. Nice to finally meet you." "Okay," Ben said after about a minute of silence. He turned onto his back before the buzzard quickly got up, grabbed its bag, and left the room. Ben shook his head as his consciousness slowly faded, yielding to the comfort of his bed. Ben awoke several hours later to the sound of his mobile going off. He had a few messages from Clentara. "Hey, you busy? I'm kind of hungry. Want to get dinner?" With that, his stomach rumbled. He realized he had gone the whole day without a single bite of food, all the while hungover from the night before. His mobile buzzed again. "Yes, meet in 5 minutes." He replied, "See you then," hitting send before heading out. So there I was naked, her father staring me down. And you know what he did? "What?" Clentara questioned, hanging on every word of Ben's story. She held back a snort, her drink shooting from her nose. She grabbed a napkin, wiping her face of the liquid. "Oh no," she said, shaking her head. "I can't, it's too embarrassing." "It's just so embarrassing," she said, hiding a blush. Ben looked right at her. "I just told you about how I got caught naked by a girl's father in his house back in high school. How could your story possibly be worse than that?" He said, his curiosity only growing. "Yeah, and I still see the guy around campus." "Oh, there's a guy?" Ben said playfully. "Well, anyway, as the end of semester approached, I was getting kind of desperate. So I went to Professor Zerb's office hours, and I started asking if there was anything, literally anything I could do to get a passing grade. You know, extra credit, a research project he needed assistance on, that sort of thing." "Sure," Ben said, nodding his head. But as he kept shooting down my requests, I kept pressing on. I mean, I needed to pass that class or else I'd have to retake it or pick a new major, and I didn't want to go through the hassle of either of those. "Exactly. Well, anyway, it got to the point. Well, see, he said, well, basically, he thought I was..." She put her head down, partially shielding her eyes. "He thought I was propositioning him." "No," Ben said. "No way. What happened next?" Well, I tried explaining to him I wasn't, but I was so flustered my words came out toppling over each other. To a buzzard, it probably sounded like gibberish. I left. I was so embarrassed I just got up and left. She was completely shielding her face by now. Ben snorted. So he actually thought you were propositioning him and you couldn't even set the record straight, he said, continuing to laugh. She uncovered her face and looked directly at Ben. It doesn't end there. Oh no, he said, his face lighting up even more. Ben held a hand to his mouth, stifling a laugh. Oh no. Yes. All I could do was yell sorry before I took off running back to my dorm. Oh my God, that is rich. Did he at least give you a passing grade? You know, for the trouble? Nope, failed me. Now I'm retaking the class, she said, blushing and shaking her head. Ben reached for his wallet before she spoke up. No, let me get it. Oh no, I couldn't. He smiled. For sure. She laid down a few zanes before dismissing herself for the restroom. Ben decided to check his mobile as he waited. He had several new notifications from his news app. Terran offensive halted 5th Fleet destroyed. Terran Armada in full retreat as Brucali advance. Brucali push new offensive. Ben thought of his cousin, who'd be fighting on that front line in a few short months after basic. He put his mobile away. He had almost forgotten about the war, but it always seemed to work its way back into his mind. No, he thought. This night is too great to think about the war. He filled his thoughts with the events of the night. They had been rejected from the first 2 restaurants who didn't serve humans. We reserve the right to refuse anyone, they had said before slamming their doors in his face. But this one was nice and friendly. Jarita knows he'd remember this place. Where to next? Ben didn't even notice she had walked back, his mind off in the clouds. Not sure. I haven't really been off campus much. I know, she said, cracking a smile. There's a place I visited when I first arrived on Avian Prime. Great view of the city. She chuckled before taking his hand and leading him away. Between cabs, or the Avion's version of a cab, and walking, they had been traveling for nearly half an hour, making their way to the top of a massive rock face overlooking the city. Before too long, they had made their way to the spot. The two overlooked the city. Ben could see the Avian Capitol building on one side of the city, and the downtown not too far from that. Its skyscrapers dwarfing the building, still not as big as the ones back on Alpha Centauri. But these were magnificent in their own way. Designed to be entered at any floor, after all the Avions were capable of flight, stands the reason they wouldn't want to enter at the ground level all the time. He looked to the other side of the city. He could see campus. It looked so much smaller from this distance, despite being the largest university in the whole republic. Taking a step back from it all and just watching everything unfold from a distance. She meant the city, of course, but Ben's mind instantly shot towards the war, always following him, never letting him escape its clutches, even if it only ever haunted his mind. He turned and looked at her. Yeah, it is nice, to just escape it all and observe. She looked back at him. They stared for a bit before turning their heads up and looking at the sky. Thousands of transports coming and leaving the planet, hundreds of orbital stations visible from the ground. He looked out over the sky and the city below. It may have been busy, but there were no ads for enlistment. There were no troop transports loading up and leaving only to return empty. There were no crying widows and widowers shrieking as they heard the bad news. No, it may have been busy, but it was peaceful. And yet, war, all he could think about, always chasing him, always in the back of his mind. He turned and faced Clintara. You know, I've never told anyone this. She turned and looked at him. Yeah? There's a reason I came here. To Avian State? Well, for that it was the... Clintara put her arm around Ben, embracing him. I know exactly how you feel. Well, not exactly, but I also came here to escape. The two looked at each other, her deep brown eyes shimmering by the light of the city. They each leaned in, Clintara's soft lips pressing against his. Maybe, just maybe, this semester wasn't going to be so bad after all. Ben and Clentara had become somewhat of a couple since that night overlooking the city. As such, she had become a regular member of the friend group, joining them on their adventures. And the group did almost everything together. They partied together, they studied together, they ate together, they spent their free time together, everything. Today was Entertainment Day, and the group had voted on Ben's suggestion. A centuries-old game still produced called Cards Against Humanity. Most of them got the references, as the modern version was geared towards modern times. Still, Ben would have to explain the more human-centered jokes to Clentara, who wasn't as well-versed in human culture as the rest. "Okay, did everyone put their cards in?" Yvonne said. "Yup," they all replied as Ivan reread the prompt card. Blank said the human to the friendtarian. He picked up the first card, "Gray people wearing thongs." The group lightly chuckled. Ivan picked up the last one. "The Terran Armada, raining hellfire on some random homeworld again." The group burst out laughing. "Well," Ivan said, stifling his laughter, "I think we have a winner." "My turn," Frary said as she drew a prompt card. "Set plasma rifles to blank." The group looked over their cards. Jitita quickly placed one down as the rest contemplated. Ben was stuck deciding between two cards, the one about the sucking or the one about dicks. Guys," Jitita said, Ben ignoring her in contemplation. "Guys," she said again much louder, gathering everyone's attention. She was pointing at the muted TV. The words, "Breaking news, Parliament declares war amidst attack," printed out on the bottom of the screen. The group scrambled to find the remote to unmute the TV. Finally being found by Trek, the group huddled around to watch. "We've brought in our resident war correspondent, Trevida, who's been following the war since it began." "Trevida, how is this attack possible? I thought the front lines were well outside of avian space." Ben sat in his Humanity 101 lecture a few days later. Professor Krennic was giving a brief overview of humanity's pre-FTL history and how it affected their modern culture and Terran governmental policy. But Ben's focus was on his own thoughts. Shit. For that, I go back to my first lecture. Prejudice. Many races fear the humans for their predatory descendants and violent history, but Ben tried real hard to focus, pushing back his racing mind. Damn this war, one final thought, before he was finally able to pay attention. Because of this, the Terran Alliance has adopted a much firmer hand when negotiating with foreign powers. Although this does have the side effect of seemingly confirming the rumors about humans in their minds, it accomplished its goal in helping to prevent wars whenever possible. Ben sat through the rest of lecture before they were dismissed. He walked with the group towards the cafeteria as they always did. As they walked, he noticed a lot of students had stopped and were staring at something. He couldn't tell what until they got closer. Two military officials, a human and an avian, had decided to cut through campus on their way to wherever. They were talking about something, but Ben was too far away to hear their full conversation. He was only able to hear a small snippet of what the human was saying as she passed closer by. "I'm sorry, Commander, but that's the best command can do. We're currently..." That's all Ben could pick up as they moved out of auditory range. "Oh, don't start with this again," Frary said. "It was bad enough back on Earth. Besides," she said smirking, "she was way out of your league." "What I lack in looks, I make up for with my winning personality," Ivan said. He ran his hand over his pointed ears. "Hey," Ivan said, before debating her on the finer points of his personality and just why human women found it attractive. "Yeah, besides, I need to do some shopping anyway. Might as well get it done before my next class." "Okay, see you tonight, though." "Totally," Ben said, as he departed from the group and made his way towards the nearest grocery store to campus. The avian slowly reached for the merchandise, keeping an eye on Ben as he rang up the good. Ben rolled his eyes. "Actually, they attacked me. You know what? It doesn't matter." He laid down some zines before exiting the store. He noticed the bag dropped by the buzzard. He held up a translator which returned, "Twine sweets." "Twine sweets?" he thought. "Must be some sort of candy." He put it in his bag before heading back to campus. He ate some of the food he bought on the way back to his dorm. He noticed on campus many students went out of their way to avoid him. Say what you will, at least I never get stuck behind a slow person, he thought to himself. After getting back to his room, he unpacked his bought goods before he only had the twine sweets left. He looked at it, pausing before laying it on his roommate's desk. He wrote a quick message on a sticky note, "A gift, Ben," before attaching it to the bag. Suddenly, his mobile buzzed. He took it out to find a message from Clentara. "Missed you at lunch." He finally found the remote, switching the TV on before his phone buzzed again. For sure. The Brucali continues to rapidly advance through our space, our brave men and women slowing their advance as they wait for Terran reinforcements. Although the Terran Alliance has promised to send help, many believe with the rapid advancements it may not come soon enough. The Prime Minister is making a state visit to plead for more help faster, but sources say that is all the Alliance is willing to do. Trevita, why is the Alliance holding off on sending more reinforcements faster when we clearly need it? Thank you, Trevita. The Terran president has released a statement promising they will defend Avion and Terran space. But if what we've seen so far... Ben slipped in Krennic's office and promptly took a seat. Actually, I just wanted to talk before my next class. Honestly, anything. I just need to clear my head. The past few days had been rough. The news continually talked of the Brucali advance through Avion space. And when it wasn't talking about the Brucali, it was talking about the Terran Alliance not doing enough, despite them having committed an entire fleet to the cause. Ben had received some nasty comments related to how humans were being greedy and not defending the region like they should. Well, in that case, critics said, "Do you remember me telling you about the deja vu research I did on Earth years back?" Well, I was contacted a few days ago by one of my former coworkers back there. Apparently they had some sort of breakthrough in their research. She sent me a copy of their findings and current study, but I haven't had much of a chance to look over it yet. Apparently it's going to be a game changer in intelligence research. Game changer? What do you mean? I'm not entirely sure, as I haven't had a chance to review the research yet, but she did say it has the potential to have a profound impact on the study of intelligence in biological life. Sounds like she really wants you to review her work. Well, let me know if you decide to take it on as a research project. I might just volunteer to help. A smile crept across Krennic's face. You never told me you were interested in research projects. Well, normally I'm not, but biological intelligence is actually my favorite class. I'm considering changing my major. Krennic had a wide grin. Even if you don't, you could always go for a doctorate in biological intelligence. Then you'd be at the forefront of biological research. He reached into his desk, pulling out a brochure of Avian State's doctoral program and handed it to Ben. Well, you do have time? You are in your first year of undergrad after all. Ben was about to reply when another student walked in, the Praetorian freezing up at the sight of Ben. "Ah, Hirib, what can I do for you?" The Praetorian locked eyes on Ben before responding. "I just had some questions about the homework. I can come back at another time if you're busy." With that, Ben left the room and made his way to his next class of the day, Fundamentals of Chemistry. Ben walked across campus and entered the science building, his mind up in the clouds. Game changer. What could be a game changer in intelligence research? His mind raced between over-the-top explanations that would make a sci-fi nerd groan, to bringing himself back to realism, reminding himself that was probably something much more mundane, and that the scientist back on Earth was probably just over hyping up her work. Still, though, scientists rarely use the term game changer unless they thought it was important. In any case, Professor Krennic would tell him about it once he had a chance to review the research. "Huh?" Ben said, being snapped back to reality. He looked around him, noticing a small crowd had started to form. "Huh?" Ben said, much more confused this time. This wasn't good. Last time a group of unknown aliens surrounded him, he ended up arrested and charged with assault. "I asked you why the Terran Alliance won't help defend the Avians." The Praetorian stepped towards Ben. "Or are we not worth your attention either?" The crowd murmured in agreement. Oh, not this shit again, Ben thought. Look, guys, I don't know why. Ben could feel his heart rate spike. Oh God, no. Look, I'm not a military expert. I don't know what the military is planning to do. Fa! He knows exactly what's going on, the first Vertorian said. They're obviously letting the Avians' military be depleted so they may roll in and take what they want with no resistance. The crowd agreed with him, inching closer to Ben. Ben was starting to lose patience. The comments were one thing, but now he was starting to become their scapegoat. He didn't like where this was leading. Okay, do you honestly think the Alliance would really put themselves at a military disadvantage like that, just so that they might gain a little more territory? And now you make excuses. What happened to not being a military expert? Ben rolled his eyes. I'm not a military expert, Ben said between clenched teeth. But have you considered that maybe the majority of the Armada is tied up defending Terran space? Honestly, we're lucky they've managed to spare anything in defense of the Oh, great, and here comes the be grateful for what you have speech. A buzzard joined in. You humans are all the same, you know. Maybe if you stopped looking down on us prey species. All right, that's enough, Ben snapped, silencing everyone. He pushed past the group shouldering the Vertorian on his way out. Ben snapped his head towards the group, the Vertorian going silent. He took a pause, narrowing his eyes before raising his arm and flipping off the group, turning and walking away. Ben couldn't focus on the lecture, his mind too wrapped up in what had occurred in the hallway. Is this what it's going to be like from now on? Random groups of aliens cornering me and tormenting me about the war effort? By God, if it wasn't for the help we have given, this whole republic would be under Brucali occupation by now. Remember that because it'll be on the exam, the professor said before moving on to the next slide. Great, now I just missed something important. Ben shook his head and tried to pay attention. The professor hadn't even moved on to the next slide before he lost focus again. Of course, they blame me for this shit. I'm the human. The big, bad, scary monster responsible for all the galaxy's problems. Ben had noticed several students were eyeing him. And great, now they can tell I'm angry. Look at the scary human getting pissed off at chemistry lectures. Now, normally inert gases don't react with anything, but an interesting thing happens when introduced to the compound. You know, it's like they don't even realize the Brucali are their true enemy. Too busy hating humans to realize we're the reason they're not all dead right now. Ben jumped as a bright flash illuminated the room, the students amazed at the reaction they just saw. Great, now I just missed a demonstration. She never does those. What happened anyway? Something about inert gases? No, that can't be right. Inert gases don't react with anything. Ben tried focusing on the lecture, putting together what happened in his head as the professor explained on. His had just started to put together what this lecture was actually over when a student's mobile broke his train of thought. Beep, beep, beep. Great. Can't even silence your phone. Beep, beep, beep. Another mobile went off across the room, interrupting his thought again. Mobiles across the room went off. He could feel his own buzzing on his leg and emitting the strange beep. He reached for his mobile when a student's voice broke the sound of the mobiles. Oh my God. He looked at his screen, where a government-issued notification sat. Avian Prime under attack, seek shelter immediately. Everyone please stay calm, please. Ben hadn't heard the rest of the professor's sentence as he rushed out of the room. He ran outside as he tried calling Clintara. Voodoo beep, voodoo beep. The number you have dialed cannot be Damn primitive cell service. Ben huffed as he frantically typed a message. Where are you? Are you safe? Come on, he said, watching the progress bar slowly inch its way before an error message popped up. Ben jumped as he heard the sound of an explosion far off in the city. He quickly made his way around the building before he heard another explosion, seeing a pillar of fire emanating from a skyscraper. He looked up at the sky, his mouth dropping at the scene above him. Dozens of Brucali fighters diving down and dropping payloads on the city below, followed shortly by the sounds of the explosions. The war hadn't just tormented his mind, it hadn't just followed his psyche. This time it followed him for real. Ben jumped, snapping back to reality as the sound of a sonic boom nearly caused him to drop his mobile. He looked up, seeing several Terran fighters racing towards the city, their engines lighting up brightly as they closed on the enemy. It didn't take long before they were engaging the Brucali. He marveled at the maneuverability of both sides' fighters as they engaged in dogfights at close range. He turned to see dozens of Terran hovercopters flying overhead, making their way to the battle. His eyes followed them before being distracted by something else. Stars. Hundreds of them in broad daylight. Except they moved erratically, some lighting up in spectacular fashion before disappearing. He realized the whole system must have been one giant battleground as the two superpowers fought over the fate of the system. He checked his mobile. Still no reply from Klintara. A million thoughts poured into his mind about where she could be or what happened to her. He tried calming himself, remembering the battle was happening over downtown, not campus. He looked up in time to see a Brucali fighter explode as the victorious Terran fighter chose a new target and engaged. Another sonic boom gathered his attention as dozens more Terran fighters flew overhead towards the city. He watched as they immediately engaged the Brucali, taking minimal casualties as they dealt death blows to the enemy. He quickly typed a response, "Yes, on my way there." With that, he headed towards the dorm in a dead sprint. This was just too much. How did the Brucali attack so quickly without much warning? How did the Terran Defense Force react that fast? A million questions popped up in his head, but what stood out among the rest? What will happen now? Ben sat in the bomb shelter, squeezed in there with what had to be hundreds of others. He had his arm around Klintara as the room was completely silent, save for the news playing on the TV. Apparently, it had taken less than 10 minutes for the Brucali to be completely driven off the planet. But now, an hour later, the battle was still raging in system. As you can see from the footage, the Brucali were not holding back on their bombardment of the capital. I suppose we're lucky the Terrans responded as fast as they did. Footage from the battle over the city replayed over and over, showing the bombing of the city before the Terran fighters showed up and decimated the attack force. Trevita, how did the Terrans respond so fast? It took them less than 10 minutes to respond to this attack and drive the Brucali off planet. Well, as of now, we're not entirely sure, but it is important to remember that Avian Prime does have Terran defense forces stationed on it. That scrambled as soon as the attack was detected. But as for the Terran fleet, I have no idea. As far as I know, they never had a fleet stationed in system. The fact that they have a fleet here, especially so soon after the attack started, is quite frankly mind-boggling. I'm sure we will learn more in the coming days. Thank you, Trevita. Terran cleanup crews are on planet helping the avian authorities. The reporter stopped as she held her wing to her ear before resuming speaking. I'm just now getting word that the Brucali fleet has fled the system, with the Terran fleet in close pursuit. Ben relaxed. This had been one hell of a day. His mind raced, replaying the events he bore witness to. His sanctuary had been attacked and not only survived but came off relatively unscathed by Brucali standards. He realized that if it had not been for the almost immediate response by TDF, he would most likely be dead or hiding from Brucali death squads right now. People started to slowly get up and exit the shelter. Ben and Klintara followed suit as students and faculty piled out and scattered across campus. He held Klintara's hand tightly as the two made their way around, taking in the scene around them. Campus had been relatively untouched by the carnage that had ensued. He noticed a crowd had formed near the quad, although he couldn't quite figure out why until they made their way closer and got a better look. Dozens of Terran military personnel were surrounding a downed Brucali fighter that had crash-landed on the quad. Mostly human with a few Brovarians scattered among them. They were picking up and loading pieces on the fighter onto a hover truck parked next to the downed craft. He watched as a few soldiers pulled the remains of the pilot out of the fighter. Ben froze at the sight of it. It was about as large as a human, a brownish-graying body with a long tail and a stinger attacked to the end of it. A blackish liquid stained the body. It also had many cybernetic implants all around, the biggest covering nearly a fourth of its head and hiding one eye. Many students gasped at the sight of it. Ben felt sick to his stomach. That thing looked terrifying, yet the Terran soldiers were handling it like this was just an average day for them. They watched for what seemed like an hour before heading back to Ben's dorm. After entering the room, Ben grabbed his datapad. He had 17 new messages, all from friends and family back home. He started replying, letting them know he was okay. It took him nearly 30 minutes to get through them all. When he finished, he looked at Clintara, who had been silent nearly the entire time. "Hey," he said as he scooched closer to her. He grabbed her hand, their fingers interlocking. "I'm glad you're all right. When the attack began, I didn't know. I couldn't get a message through, and Ben leaned in as the two kissed. This semester had to be the weirdest experience he had ever gone through. He faced almost constant speciesism from day one, yet also made some of the closest friends he had ever had and felt something for Clintara he hadn't felt in a long time. He put up with constant hateful rhetoric from those around him, just for those same students to be rescued by his people. All of that, and the semester had just begun. He didn't know what the future had in store for him, but whatever was coming, he knew it would be an adventure.
If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.